So this is the series about, my last 10 to 15 years in entrepreneurship. I thought I would do a vlog series talking about all these wild and crazy situations that I've experienced and been in. And so today, this is a vlog about Scottsdale, how I came to executive produce a movie, and the time that I tried to sell Elvis Presley's 24 karat gold piano. So yeah, the stories that have come up, man, my experience in Scottsdale, when I moved to Scottsdale about 15 years ago, it was after the crash. And there was a lot of interesting things happening, right? Big financial crash. There's a lot of investors moving in. And then there was a lot of, at that point in time, Scottsdale was very well known as kind of a place for a lot of scammers. So at the time, I was going out a lot networking. And in Scottsdale, there was a lot of old people. I was like in my early 20s. So I would go out surrounded by old people everywhere. Phoenix was historically a retirement city, basically, right? There's a lot of investors moving in. If you see Phoenix and Scottsdale today compared to where it was 10 to 15 years ago, you'll see the progression. Big move of investors. A lot of capital came in from East Coast, West Coast, all over the country, and really transformed the city over the 10 to 15 years that I was there. And so I networked a lot. And through networking, I've met a lot of interesting people. Some of you might know, there's this guy, I'm not going to say his name, but he's a venture capitalist. He would tell people, I would see him out everywhere I went networking. So, I connected with him. What do you do? He would say he's a venture capitalist, and he would always introduce me to people and tell me about some of these deals he's raising money for. And, it was interesting because anytime I would call him, I'd be like, hey, what are you doing? I'm just golfing. And I thought, I'm like, how does this guy survive? He doesn't have a job. He's always golfing. He's just trying to get deals done. And I've seen all sorts of crazy deals come through. I met with this guy who was trying to raise some absurd amount of money for a movie series that was about, some like spiritual thriller movie. And, I knew this guy was full of shit because he was trying to raise like $50 million for a movie. And I was like, you just look at it. It's like, how are you going to make money on this deal? So yeah, met a lot of people like that through networking, especially when you're networking with venture capitalists and, people that claim to be able to fund deals. You want to make sure that you're not doing anything that's illegal. There's a lot of things that are kind of a gray area. And then obviously like things that you shouldn't be doing, advertising, for capital and things like that. But definitely in the world of networking and meeting high-level entrepreneurs, high-level people who are raising money, people who have interesting deals. I mean, I've looked at a lot of deals. This was kind of my foray into real estate. I looked at deals of like a resort in Acapulco where people had like fallen into disrepair and needs a big investor to come in and flip it. I don't know the logistics of doing multi-million-dollar deals in another country. That to me was obviously foreign to me at the time. So one of the guys that I got introduced to was Kells, the producer from New York. And obviously he has his own backstory, but he was trying to raise money for a music and film project at the time. And it was an interesting, it was cool. They had a soundtrack. The soundtrack was actually really good. I would listen to it. And I was, thinking to myself, like, hey, this could actually go somewhere. It was involving a singer from New York who was like an R&B artist. And they were actually pretty good. Their tracks were good. Everything was good. But, they ended up not raising money or producing that film. Many years later, he called me out of the blue and asked for some help on the Stash project. And so that's how I ended up becoming a executive producer of this trilogy, Stash. The second one's coming out this year. And then Kells is going to do another project before he gets to the final series in Stash. But yeah, Stash 2 had a bigger budget. It's going to be a more interesting film. Of course, first one is what it is. It was well done for the budget. And, never imagined that I would be doing any of these things, right? So, yeah, I mean, your environment has such a big impact on what becomes possible in your life and what you look at, what kind of opportunities there are. Your environment's huge, and so you should always be out networking and engaging in the environment, seeing what's out there. One of the other things that occurred at the time was through these channels of networking, I met another guy who was a producer that worked with Quincy Jones, and I don't know about a lot of other projects he was working on, but he had some pretty big connections, and he was an interesting guy, and I was into producing music, so we talked to him about a few different things, and at the time, this was also when I was working with Jet Set Magazine, And my boss, who I loved working with this guy because he was just so creative, and we're always talking about ideas. It was, in a sense, it was like working for a startup, right? So it was a newer company. We're always looking for ideas on how to collaborate, generate revenue, and things like that. And this music producer guy had told me that he's trying to sell Elvis Presley's 24 karat gold piano. And of course, it's not like solid 24 karat gold. It's like gold plated with like some gold foil or something like that. And this is Elvis Presley, right? So this is a major piece of music history. And so I went to my boss at Jet Set and said, hey, we can get it at this price. We can basically get I don't know, wholesale fee or whatever for if we sell this, because in Jet Set, they had a lot of high net worth investors and individuals and things like that. So, I'm coming into this world, of ultra high net worth individuals, investors, venture capitalists, and that was Scottsdale in the 2010 to 2020 era. That was like, there's just a lot of interesting things, a lot of interesting people. So we talked to this guy, I talked to my boss, we ran an ad in the magazine for the piano and did the whole thing online and everything like that. And I think we only ever got like one potentially serious lead, but in the end, we never did sell it. But it would have been life-changing money for me at the time. We would have made, we would have each made $100,000 or something like that by selling this to some investor or collector or something. So that's how I became a executive producer of a movie, and that's how I almost sold Elvis Presley's gold piano.